This is System Crash, a weekly tech news show willing to tell the hard truths about how tech and the titans who own and operate it is really transforming the world. I'm Paris Marks.
And I'm Brian Merchant.
This system has just begun to crash, so support the show by heading over to patreon.com/systemcrashpod, where you can sign up to get the monthly bonus episodes. Also, rate the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. For the next few weeks, we're going to be shaking things up a bit as part of a new series we're calling Elon in Power. Each week, we'll have on a different guest to discuss a different part of Elon Musk's history to assess how he got to the point where he's Donald Trump's wingman in tearing apart the US government. To get us started, we have the perfect guest. Max Chafkin is a senior reporter at Bloomberg Businessweek, co-host of Elon Inc., and the author of The Contrarian, the best book you could read on the rise of Peter Thiel. Max, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for that introduction, Paris.
Absolutely. Obviously, we've sort of been in contact. I've read your book when it came out. So really excited to have you on to kind of kick us off for this series and to dig into Elon Musk, but also some of these important relationships that really start to form, like who he is as he reaches the level that he's at today.
We're going to try to trace sort of Elon's rise and drill into some of his main interests. We're going to be looking at SpaceX and Tesla, the companies that sort of he built his fortune on. We're going to be looking at things like his affinity for science fiction, how that might have shaped his thinking. And I couldn't be more thrilled that we're starting here with you, Max, looking at Elon's sort of earliest days in Silicon Valley and how he really starts piecing things together. As Paris mentioned, we're fans and have been since even before you wrote this great book on Peter Thiel, who is still one of the most influential forces in Silicon Valley, if not the most influential in Silicon Valley in ways that are sort of more behind the scenes these days than Musk is himself. But yeah, we've just reached this point where at the time of recording, it was just yesterday that Elon Musk is with the president of the United States and they're doing like sort of an infomercial for Tesla vehicles.
Yeah, everything is computer, guys, which is what Trump said as he got in the Tesla, which is just very funny.
He's not wrong. Everything is computer. Yeah,
everything is computer in the car, and it was staggering, both kind of for me anyway. As a reminder, like that Trump is good at this. He's good at this kind of reality show spectacle, and in certain ways, what more could Elon Musk ask for? But also, like, what a contrast. 4 years ago, Biden had an event on the South Lawn, didn't invite Tesla, invited all the other Detroit automakers. Elon Musk regarded that as this grievous insult. I think you could tell a story that perceived slight led him down this right-wing rabbit hole that ultimately led to his purchase of X and his massive donation to Trump. And now here we are seeing sort of what he got on the other side of that, which is this, for better or worse, right? Like, I don't know that he's gotten his money's worth yet, but he did get a very effective bit of salesmanship from the president.
I was thinking about exactly that story, like, as I was watching it playing out yesterday. I was like, man, to go to that event with Joe Biden and the EV makers and GM in particular, and like pissing Elon Musk off so much to like, now he has his president touting his electric car, and it's not a problem that his workers are non-union now. I wonder, Max, like, before we go back in history, what you have made of just what we have been witnessing the past few months as we've had this alignment of Elon Musk with Donald Trump and with this MAGA movement and his increasing move into government, and what that has meant for the United States as a whole, really.
In some ways, and like I'll admit, like the proximity to power, the extent to which Musk has seemingly captured elements of kind of this very powerful political movement. This was like a political coup for Elon Musk, and I think it's been surprising and impressive how complete that coup was, to the point that the president, on a very busy day, we have a trade war going on, the stock market is crashing, is taking time out to, basically pump him up a bit. In other ways, it's not surprising, and maybe it shouldn't have been surprising. And I say that because he's always been a chameleon politically. And so, like, the fact that he would move towards power, which is essentially what he did in the 2024 election, like try to ally himself with the ascendant political party. That's something he's been doing essentially his whole career. Probably the more significant thing is people think of Elon Musk, probably not you guys and not all of your listeners, but like, I think a lot of people see Elon Musk fundamentally as an inventor. He's a really great engineer and he creates these products, and like that's what he does. And that's partly because that's the story that Musk has kind of told about himself, kind of claiming the mantle of Steve Jobs. If you look at the cover of the Isaacson book, right, it looks like the Jobs book. Obviously, I think Musk, one of the reasons he decided to confide in Walter Isaacson versus me or, one of us or somebody else is because Isaacson wrote the Jobs book. And so, he's claiming that legacy. But I think if you really look at what he's good at, it's kind of two things, one of which is marketing, just like Trump, amazing marketer. And then the second thing is basically wheedling money out of government. And that is something that he's done with incredible success, both at SpaceX and Tesla and some of these lesser companies over the entire course of his career. And so in that way, his position at Doge, it's crazy because he's in this position to potentially anyway, cut funding from federal agencies that are investigating him, or even, somehow figure out a way to funnel money to his own companies. But in other ways, it's just the ultimate expression of this thing that he's done for a very long time.
Yeah, I really want to go back and start talking about those early days and what we can kind of glean from the way that he sort of really does sort of run on grievance and how he manages politics in general. But I do think it's an interesting point that you brought up that, he does gravitate towards power. And, I've been following Musk for years as well. And I think it's interesting that he was so successful in channeling sort of the political energy of the day in the Obama era where it was all aspirational and, I'm building electric cars that are going to help solve the climate crisis. And that's how he built up political capital in that era and endeared himself to the liberals who are buying his electric vehicles. And now it's almost the inverse when the time calls for it, right? Where how you get political power now is by saying you're going to burn all that down and that all these people deserve to be punished. And as you said, marketing comes quite natural. Mythologizing maybe is another word you could use to describe him, but it's worth considering that for a second, how he's just moved between those poles. One way to put it is that it's a political radicalization, but another is it's just expert marketing when the market calls for it, right?
And it's got to be both, right? Maybe that is what's really over the last 5 years, something has surprised me, the extent to which he's really fully bought in to the point where I don't know how he comes back from it, and where it may be hard actually if in a few years we have a Democratic president, Gavin Newsom or something, it may be hard for Elon Musk to separate from Trump because he has been so radicalized and has so thoroughly embraced this worldview in a way, even during the Obama years. And I'm so glad you mentioned that because Obama, I think, is really very much responsible or one of the key players in helping to create not only the mythology around Elon Musk, but also literally making sure that these companies survived and funneling money that, I think were very good uses of federal funding in retrospect, lots of jobs created and so on. It's hard to imagine Elon Musk being Elon Musk without that relationship with Barack Obama.
I want to start bringing us back now, right? And, you've talked a lot about the narrative, and that is something that I found in looking at Elon Musk is always very important to understanding who he is and how he's become who he is. When do you start to see that narrative around him forming? When does he really start to try to create this story about himself that is kind of the story that we know of Elon Musk today? How far back does that go, and how far was he really planning this out, do you think?
I should just say, by way of my own background or whatever, I first met Elon Musk and first started writing about him in 2007 when he was building this myth. And at that point, the story that Musk told, which is a story probably lots of people know, is basically when I was a young person, I decided that there were these handful of major problems, one of which was global warming, and the other was making life a multiplanetary species. And he might have had a third one that somehow fit into another. But it was basically I always wanted to do this. The transition from Earth to other planets is the single most significant thing to happen in the history, not only of the human race, but maybe of all races. That it was such an important thing. It's what he wanted to work on. And he built this story that it all kind of hung together where climate change was a really big problem. So electric cars, if that didn't work out and we accidentally destroyed our planet, we might need a second planet, Mars or whatever. And certainly he's been talking about it since then. There's probably some truth to that, all of that. I also think if you dial back, Musk's actual history in business is as a Silicon Valley tech guy, a guy who started a .com startup in the late 90s. It was called Zip2, and it was essentially like a Yahoo Maps competitor. It was like a B2B thing that would, allow businesses to like put their business on the internet. Pretty conventional, essentially selling into a bubble. And I think PayPal, which he started afterwards, and I should say he actually started a company called X and then X.com, which merged with PayPal.
The original X.
Yeah, the original X. Yeah. Well, and that was another one where there were a lot of people starting electronics payment startups. It was kind of like the most obvious thing in the world that you could possibly start in like 1999. And that's not to say that like it was a bad idea. Like obviously like PayPal and X together built one of the defining payment platforms. PayPal is still around. It's worth a lot of money. Like there's other things around now, Zelle and so on, but people are still PayPaling. So, I mean, they definitely built something lasting. But again, I think he was basically like perceiving a boom like any other entrepreneur and finding a way in. He starts this company called X, and his idea was somewhat different from the Peter Thiel idea, which was much more based on like just email payments. And Musk was doing email payments, but he had this kind of like grandiose idea that email payments were going to be the beginning of this much larger thing, this online banking app, like a super app, basically.
An everything app, perhaps?
Yeah. I don't know if he specifically used the words everything app. So this story is pretty well known, but he was running PayPal, the company that had merged when he and Peter Thiel combined forces. And one of the reasons he got fired was because like the bubble was collapsing and there was pressure. But what happened is that the Thielites basically got frustrated with Musk's leadership. And the thing they were frustrated with was he was trying to turn it into this much larger, like he's taking this very successful thing they have and trying to graft it onto this wild and crazy thing. And one of the breaking points was he tried to rename the app from PayPal back to X. The Thiel people were like, what the hell? Like, we have this very successful brand. Like, it's just crazy. It's just like this obviously ego-driven, overambitious. It's all the things that you can kind of see in Musk today. And he got fired. I think like Musk basically reinvented himself following his departure from PayPal. And like one of the ways he reinvented himself, he began telling this story about his sort of role as like humanity's savior. I think this happens to a lot of people, right? Like a lot of rich guys, like they make money one way and then they're like, now that I'm rich, like I'm going to do it the way I want to do. And I'm going to devote myself to like stuff that actually matters or whatever. But the other thing is he really wanted to be CEO. He didn't just want to save the world. He wanted to run these companies. And he was very, very mad. And I think in a weird way, despite being worth like $300 billion and despite having all this success, like is still very mad at the people who fired him, which include, some of the most powerful people in Silicon Valley. I mean, Mike Moritz was basically the main investor in the company. He acceded to the demands of Peter Thiel and his allies.
And Mike Moritz being the venture capitalist at Sequoia, right?
Yes, exactly. Kind of like legendary Sequoia venture capitalist, was friends with Steve Jobs. He's like semi-retired now.
Could we actually do a quick taxonomy of these players now? Because they are looming larger than ever, many of them. You mentioned the Thielites in one faction, and there's the famous PayPal Mafia. So could we even like go back one step? And so like, how does Musk meet these folks? Who's involved in PayPal? I know some of the listeners will be aware, but
it's amazing.
Others won't. Yeah.
So first of all, remember I said like so many people were starting these companies. They're everywhere. Like PayPal and X, Elon Musk's company and Peter Thiel's company. And Thiel's co-founder was Max Levchin, who's another Silicon Valley figure. They were like across the hall from one another. I mean, like literally in the same building. I get into this in my book about Thiel, but there were allegations of intellectual property theft and so on. They were literally neighbors.
Throw a rock and hit one at the time. Yeah.
The funny thing about this is PayPal is like an amazing story in so many different ways, because in addition to like helping to define like this crucial part of how money is exchanged on the internet and how businesses got built, it also like created a bunch of the business models that I think we see today, like this kind of hyper aggressive growth strategy where you basically just like dump as much money as you can into buying users, which we've seen, many times since like with Uber and so on. And, there's a whole vocabulary around this that was essentially created by these PayPal guys. People talk about these like network effects and this idea that in internet businesses, unlike other businesses, monopolists tend to win out. There's a whole conversation to be had about whether this is even true or whatever. The story that they tell is like, you just spend as much money as you can to get a monopoly, and then you jack up prices later. And PayPal did that. They basically gave money to people. They would like put money in your PayPal account to get you to have PayPal, and basically like took their venture capital dollars and sent it straight to users.
Do I remember correctly that for a time there was like a competition between X and Confinity, which was Thiel's company that was running PayPal, and they were like trying to see who was going to attract more users with these like upfront payments and who was going to offer more and all this kind of stuff. Like they were just like blowing money.
And that's why they merged, right? If you're a user, it's like you could really take advantage of this. Anyway, company went public and then really struggled because of the dot-com bust and everything. And they sold themselves to eBay for, between $1 and $2 billion. Not a huge amount of money, especially in like current Elon Musk terms. And then at that point, Musk had been diluted like crazy. Like, it's not like we're talking about tens of millions of dollars, maybe $100 million, not a whole lot more than that though. All of these guys, despite the enmity, Musk, despite the fact that he was kind of mad at Peter Thiel and Max Levchin and the people who fired him, he also, I think very smartly, realized that an alliance or whatever was more valuable. And I think he was also grateful because it's like, it's one thing if you're fired and the guy who fires you destroys the company, but they didn't. They preserved the value. He comes away with a payday. Like they did a good job. And so coming out of PayPal, Peter Thiel starts this hedge fund and he starts a venture capital firm. Musk invests in the hedge fund. Thiel and Musk help give David Sachs, who's this friend of Peter Thiel, money to make a movie called Thank You for Smoking. And what starts to develop is this influence network that becomes known as the PayPal Mafia. That's not like a thing that people would use derisively to refer to them. That's what they like call themselves. It's a network of favor trading and I guess patronage. And you could see why it's useful, right? Like these are people with money, so they invest in each other's companies. They also have networks of other engineers and so on. Lots of these engineers will like bounce between different nodes in this PayPal Mafia network. And there's a sort of last thing that I should mention, which is really important, is that the PayPal Mafia has kind of an ideological component to it as well. I mean, Musk is sort of an odd duck in this group because most of the people who are in this network, especially the people who are on the Thiel side, came from the Stanford Review, which was this like right-wing newspaper that Peter Thiel started. They all kind of share very similar politics. And not just similar politics, but sort of sensibilities. They're very similar. You see a lot of guys who have connections to South Africa. So David Sachs, who I mentioned, was a Stanford Review editor, or I think originally from South Africa, but like came to the US as a very young person. Musk, obviously, Thiel, born in Germany, but spent time in South Africa. And it just turns into this, like I said, like a business network, but one with an ideology. And that ideology is conservative for the most part, although there were exceptions, and Musk was one exception. What I'd say is the core of it is more an idea technologists should basically rule the world. It's like so libertarian, it kind of verges into authoritarian because you're so convinced that you need complete freedom. And the only way to get that is to have some kind of tech-friendly dictator, ideally probably like a technologist himself, to set those policies and set the terms of engagement such that like you're in charge. You had a bunch of people with different politics, like Musk, as I said, was kind of this chameleon. He was doing business with the government, with SpaceX. Tesla depended in large part on policy. So he sort of, over the years, would like contort to whatever the government was doing, whereas Thiel was basically like a consistent conservative.
I mean, this is one of the more interesting sort of relationships, I think, in Silicon Valley and recent tech history is Musk and Peter Thiel. As you said, there was tension, between them and when they were running the company that became PayPal and that merged and Musk lost confidence of investors. And maybe to talk a little bit about this relationship between Peter Thiel, because another thing that shows up in your book is that there aren't a lot of people that Musk is cowed by is going too far. Like Peter Thiel is obviously somebody who knows until very recently, I feel like the last 6 months to a year, like everything's off the table. Musk is in his own stratosphere, and it's very hard to read what is actually going on in his head these days for a lot of reasons that we can talk about later too. But until that point, I think even like Peter Thiel was someone that kind of clearly commanded Musk's respect, even as he became wealthier than Thiel, arguably more powerful than Thiel in an outward sense. Why does Musk have this sort of almost awe or respect for Thiel, or why, or is that a correct sort of reading, or what is it? What is the relationship?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, well, first of all, very few people who have ever gotten the better of Elon Musk, right? Like, there are not that many examples, at least big time examples. And like, I just gave you one. Yeah, you're right. There's some respect there. So Thiel, despite his political thing or whatever, he like never invested in Tesla, but he did invest in SpaceX. And in fact, invested in SpaceX at a moment when SpaceX like desperately needed the money. The rough story of SpaceX is, Elon Musk wanted to do something in space. He explored a few different things. He initially was going to like do some sort of demonstration project involving like Russian launches, and got the idea of starting a launch company. Part of what led to that is that the US government at the time was trying to get somebody to do launches because the shuttle was getting wound down and there was a need for it. There was this like pool of money that NASA was creating for commercial players, and like Musk tapped into that. But like during the time when he was doing his launches, they had, I believe, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 launch failures where it didn't work. At one point, like right after the launch, actually, I think Thiel had invested earlier, but in any case, Thiel invested after one of these failures, and Musk used it as a way to essentially keep the company going. Like, has a launch failure, and he comes out and says, listen, like, we're still going, come hell or high water, and we have money from Founders Fund, which was Thiel's company. That was, first of all, very successful investment for Thiel. Like, SpaceX has become probably the most important investments in Thiel's portfolio, especially like post Facebook. He invested in Facebook very early.
But also got out pretty early, right?
He did, yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised. Like, he loves to hedge his bets. Like, I'm sure, like, if you dug into the secondary market sales of SpaceX, he may have done some hedging there too. But he saw the opportunity, and he gave Musk, and he trusted Musk, and that was, and I think that got him a long way with Musk. The thing is, they are like oil and water. It's very hard to imagine two guys who are different. Thiel is this like super thoughtful, contemplative, bordering on secretive and scheming. Everything with Thiel is like, what is he secretly trying to say? Like, he's somebody who's like very interested in secrecy and deception and, whatever. And Musk is like, just says what the hell is on his mind all the time. Thiel, as you said, Paris, like, he loves to hedge. He's always like, how can I like get out of this investment at the right time? Musk is like only happy, it seems, if he's like doing the opposite of hedging, right? And then I think the other part that led to conflict between the two of them is Thiel passed on Tesla at a time when Musk could have really used the investment. Musk told me this story when I was writing the book, and he kind of framed it as like a commentary on Thiel's beliefs about global warming, which Thiel is essentially a climate change skeptic. He like didn't believe in this ideologically. I had kind of interpreted that as like, oh, like there's this deep ideological disagreement between Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. In retrospect, I think maybe it was more just Musk felt hurt that Thiel did not believe in him. And especially given the way that Musk has in the last couple of years, like really moved away from this kind of like hardline position on climate change, where he used to talk about it as this like existential crisis. We need to do something about it like ASAP. Now you listen to him like talking to Trump, and it's like he's not quite like going as far as Trump, who's in like full on climate skepticism. But Musk is sort of saying, you're basically not wrong. This is a long-term problem. And now when Musk talks about like, why is he doing SpaceX? It's not about climate change, right? It's about AI. It's about some other apocalypse. He's even like de-emphasizing the very idea of electric cars. So there was like a legitimate ideological difference, whereas like where Musk kind of framed himself as this like climate capitalist, and Thiel was skeptical of climate capitalism for a bunch of reasons, some of which I think have to do with his climate skepticism, and some having to do with like his ideas about investing. But anyway, there was this kind of divide. And then it's really only in the last couple of years where Musk has sort of moved much closer to sort of Thiel's politics, and not just Thiel's politics, but kind of like a lot of Thiel's methods. Like if you look at how Thiel played Trump's first election, it's almost like Musk is just like following his playbook, but like doing it like at 100 times more. So, much more money. Like Thiel was in his support of Trump, it was always kind of qualified. Even today, even Trump is president. He's, has been president twice. And in some ways, Thiel has been vindicated by that. But Thiel is like never quite willing to say like, to give Trump the full ideological bear hug. He's always trying to make clear that there are differences. And whereas Musk, it's like, he's got the MAGA hat on. He's so MAGA. It's scary. Like there's none of that. But I do think the playbook and the ideology's kind of gotten closer to Thiel.
Well, I feel like that shows the other like big distinction between them, right? Where Thiel kind of like operates in the shadows, whereas Musk is like desperate for that attention and, for people to look at him and to see him positively and to get the praise. Like going back to what you were talking about Biden and the EV summit, that seems to really have turned Musk on Biden and the Democrats and kind of started sending them down this path of an ideological shift. There's a number of things that you've talked about that I kind of want to pick up on, but one of the things that I think really stands out to me when I look back at this period is how there are things that happen in this moment at PayPal that don't seem to really impact on this narrative that we have of Elon Musk as he moves forward, right? You were saying how he was talking about climate change and being a multiplanetary species, and he is really effective at setting this narrative about who he is, about what he's doing, and then how that narrative kind of gets retold to the public, right? And kind of becomes the story of Elon Musk, right? Kind of repeated in these biographies and all this kind of stuff. But then when you look back at this period, you see like at Zip2, he is almost ousted by the board because of the way that he's managing the company. And you see this like poor treatment of workers, even back in that moment. And then you move ahead to PayPal, as you were talking about, and he is literally ousted. In that case, he's taken away from this. I remember there's this interesting story where after he's deposed or after he's removed as CEO, he's like asking if he can still do interviews with the press because that's something that's like quite important to him. But even there as well, like, the people running this company, as you were saying, like the Thielites, certainly, but, I think it was even a bit broader than that. We're kind of saying like he is making really bad decisions that are going to send this kind of successful thing that we have basically like to potentially crash and burn. What do we see in that moment that doesn't really get integrated into this story that we have of Elon Musk? But if it had, maybe we would have thought about him in a different way.
You guys have probably seen this clip, and I'm sure other people have. But, there's a clip from like, I think it's 1999 after the sale of Zip2 of where Elon Musk, he's talking to some TV program about it's about like these like crazy engineers, and it's Elon Musk buying a McLaren. And McLaren is like the most expensive. I don't know that much about like super fast cars, but it's like, the equivalent of like a Formula One car that you could buy, basically. I'm sure car heads will get mad about that. But anyway, it's a very expensive sports car, not great gas mileage. And like that was Musk's whole identity during the early days of Tesla, was not really about climate change. And this was honestly like very smart. His sort of critique of electric cars is that back then was like they're marketing electric cars as it's a thing for do-gooders, but really they're really awesome cars. I'm a car guy. I love fast gas guzzlers, but like I could make a better electric car. That was the original pitch for Tesla. Like the first time I interviewed him, he was driving a Porsche. I think he still had the McLaren, or maybe he had just gotten rid of it.
Didn't he total it, or was that a different one?
I think you're right. Although I kind of think maybe it got fixed or something. I don't actually know. There is like a famous story where he crashed the McLaren with Peter Thiel in it. But anyway, he's driving around in this Porsche, and then you think about like, okay, well, what was going on back then? Well, like Barack Obama had not been elected president yet. GM had famously like killed the electric car, and the president was George W. Bush, right? Like his whole framing early on was very different from the framing he settled on during the Obama years. The framing was like a sort of like soft libertarianism, like a George W. Bush, like, yeah, we're going to save the world, but like we're going to do it with markets or whatever.
Yeah.
And like, Obama is a variation of that, but it's sort of like making the saving the world a little bit more important than the market. So we talk about Tesla not as this do-gooder thing, or even something that was about reducing carbon footprint, really. It was just about an awesome car.
Which was so smart, right? That's when I started covering him as well. I was actually working for a sustainability blog. It was like one of my first jobs. I was like, what do we make of this guy? But in hindsight, like, you get the best of both worlds, right? Because you can go to investors with this pitch that it's like, no, we're going to make a kick-ass car. Everybody's going to want to drive it. It doesn't matter whether it's saving the world or not. It's just going to kick ass. It looks good on the cover of magazines and all that kind of stuff. And then you can go to the consumers and the liberal who have just seen the Al Gore movie, An Inconvenient Truth, and go like, oh, look, this is a way that I can sort of support that. So it's like, it really did enter that market, I think, in a really smart way. And he has that plan that he's going to, then start selling less expensive cars and so on and so forth.
Right. Well, and I mean, you're just looking for ways in which the narrative is maybe incomplete. Like another one, although it doesn't totally fit into this like political thing. Elon Musk is not the founder of Tesla. I mean, like, I think officially, legally, like the company, there's a settlement, and
retroactively
calls him the founder. And I think he does have a very strong claim to having played a very important role. Like when you look at, like, there's no doubt that like the Model S and really the Model 3 were like impressive business achievements, probably much more impressive than the sports car, which only sold like 1,200 or something like that. But that said, he was not the founder. There was like this other guy who was the CEO of Tesla, Martin Eberhard. There was another guy, and they had founded it. And Mark Tarpenning. And Musk essentially ousted them. He got a big stake in the company and ran, I'm sure he would dispute this, but like a version of the playbook that had been run on him. Right. He ran on those guys and he made himself CEO. And, that was like then completely left out of the narrative to the point that Eberhard sued Musk. There was this settlement. There's like a similar back and forth over the founding of PayPal where Musk objected to media accounts. There's like an email that Valleywag, the former Gawker, tech blog published in which Musk is sort of complaining about not being credited as the co-founder of PayPal, and kind of listing all the reasons. Like, he really needs that, wants that.
Still, look at the OpenAI emails now, where he's just like, it's now we see it now in hindsight more with again, we get this litany of examples with Tesla going all the way back to PayPal and through OpenAI. And now, it's just such a core part of what he needs. Do you think that's just this need for like sort of affirmation? Is it pure ego? Like, he needs, and he's got 5 companies, he's the CEO of all of them. Like, he has to be the one in the command seat.
It's always hard to like know, are they just like mashing buttons, or are they, or is this all like an amazing strategy? But so with that caveat aside, like, I do think Musk created this identity for himself and used it very, very effectively to market himself and his companies. And like, part of that identity, maybe like the most important part or whatever, is him as this creator. One of the things that made Tesla, the kind of more mature Elon Musk run Tesla, such a crazy, like, boundary-breaking company, beyond the fact that it sold electric cars instead of cars powered by internal combustion engines, was the fact that, like, it didn't market. Its marketing was just Elon Musk talking to reporters and telling this incredibly compelling story. Brian, you said it, like, right? Like, the version of it when he was just starting out, which is like, this is going to be an awesome car. Like, that's why it's very hard to talk about Elon Musk without talking about the media, because he used the media. He understood, in kind of the same way that Trump did, that there is something like very valuable about, number one, like being available to reporters, and number two, being authentic or seeming authentic, that's valuable. Like, Brian definitely, right? Like, he picked up the phone. If you could get to him, he responded to his emails and he picked up the phone. And I think he just use that to his advantage in a big way.
And as you said, just like making sure that he is because he understood also, I think.
Yeah.
It's such a great point now that like a lot of people are like, oh, whatever, I got my payday and I got out. It doesn't matter if I'm the COO or the CTO or whatever. But he knows, at least he recognizes that the investor class, the public, certainly people, just the way that Trump is the boss on TV. He's quibbling over, like, he's like, no, I got to be CEO because this is crucial to my general mythology building project. And if I'm not the CEO, then maybe the ball doesn't keep rolling in quite the same way.
And like, you could see why that, like, Twitter is valuable to him, like, first as a Twitter user and then later, I guess, owning it. I do think, like, this whole question of like, Musk, is he the creator or not, or is he creating? It gets to some of the problems with Doge and what he's doing right now with Trump, and why I think this is all like kind of a moving target, but we're seeing like protests. The Tesla stock has fallen a lot. Why he's eroding his brand so much? And I think it's because Doge really breaks with the brand, like with his own personal story. He's telling a story now in which he is like the consultant from Office Space. And like that is just like fundamentally so uncool. Like everybody know, like that is the, like those guys are the villains. Like even people who are like, even if you're like, yes, we really need to cut government spending, the deficits are too big, like that, it does not have the romance.
Maybe it's the collision of these two, because you could kind of see how in his brain he convinced himself that it would be cool, where it's like, I'm going to go into the government with an AI first strategy. We're going to modernize it. Maybe there is a way that he is like, we're going to cut trillions from the budget. Everybody's going to be so impressed. Conservatives will love me. I think it's delusional because nobody likes to see a lot of people get fired unless you're like the hardest line small government champion out there. But I can almost see how like he could have convinced himself that this project was another one of his sort of endeavors in which he's in charge and gets to get the accolades. I also think his Twitter brain, the fact that he's so ensconced in right-wing Twitter politics, that also helped convince him that maybe he would be cheered roundly for this rather than, yelled at.
So I see what you're saying. I mean, it could be, hey, like people didn't think electric cars were cool, and rich guys in Napa didn't think electric cars were cool in like 2003. So maybe, but yeah, I could totally see that story. And I mean, he has attached himself to like this incredibly salient, media brand, which is like Trump. So it does feel like just like a very profound departure from that like otherwise fairly consistent story that he's told about himself for decades.
So, I mean, what do you think is going on? Do you think it is just like a purely like he's got this opportunity to carve out some more contracts if he fires public sector workers, then he can replace them with it's just like purely a business play? Or it's just because, as you said before, being this ideological is also somewhat new to him, or at least being ideologically nuanced. He's followed the power. He's followed the money.
The way I thought about Thiel is that the business project and the political project are kind of connected. And so like the political project feeds the business project, feeds the political project, and it's like this vicious circle. Or PayPal is this kind of like pseudo-libertarian thing. It's like transcending borders. You can move money anywhere. Meanwhile, Thiel is like advocating those values in the political sphere. And this kind of goes on like throughout Thiel's career. Like he's talking up Donald Trump and he's selling Palantir to the US government or whatever. So, and I think like with Musk, there's maybe some of that where like it's all connected, or it's become sort of connected. Musk's, the thing that he cares most about in the world is SpaceX. SpaceX is a defense contractor. It has a lot to gain from Trump. I've had a bunch of conversations like this with folks over the last couple of months where like you look at some thing like Musk is like attacking some regulator that's like investigating Tesla, like the SEC. I think it's very unlikely, for instance, that the SEC will bring charges against Elon Musk into connection with like trades. But like, how valuable is that really? Like Musk is constantly getting fined by the SEC, and he seems to have done just fine with that. But like the payoff with SpaceX is tremendous. What Musk wants is for the US government to cancel the Artemis program or modify it in such a way. The Artemis program is the moon program. And the moon program is using a different launch vehicle than the one that Elon Musk offers. Like Elon Musk's vehicle is being used for the moon landing stage of that program, not as a main launch vehicle, but it's a Mars rocket. And so ideal world is you defund or cut or change that program, and all of a sudden Elon Musk is the main launch provider to this enormous program, and that would be worth like, I don't know, tens of billions of dollars probably. That's the potential payoff, I think.
But also on equal footing, he would get to be in charge of it, right? Is that part of the calculus too?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, another kind of consistent message is this idea that like SpaceX is better than NASA, which kind of leaves out like huge parts of that story. One of which is that like NASA basically created SpaceX. NASA hired Elon Musk to make SpaceX, and you could tell. But anyway, he would be in control and he would be profiting tremendously. And I guess you're right, Brian, like that you got to think about the control, because I mean, Musk is worth a lot of money, and so the incremental value to him, I don't know how much it is. He's very rich, but like his wealth is more unstable than people realize. And I think the money is probably more important to him than people realize, just because even though he says, and I kind of believe him, that like it's not like he wants to make $10 billion to buy fancy art or fine wine or something like that. But I do think like his empire is built on these very volatile assets that could change in value. And there's a world where he could be worth way, way less than 300 billion. And he needs to preserve that value or expand it or whatever if he wants to continue, if he wants to have control of our Mars colony. Like that is like not something that a mere billionaire is going to be able to achieve. You probably need to be like a centibillionaire. Like I think he's more focused on the money than he is willing to admit, and that certainly at like Tesla and Musk kind of allies are willing to admit, because they've said essentially that like, how could this be self-dealing? How is there's no potential for corruption here. He's too rich to be corrupt.
You're never too rich to be corrupt.
Yeah, he certainly wants to present a certain image of himself there, right? As not being so obsessed with the money, but just the bigger project of transforming humanity.
Yeah, so as you were saying, like much has been made of the PayPal Mafia, self-branded PayPal Mafia, and Peter Thiel, but also David Sachs, who you mentioned, who is now playing a prominent role in the Trump administration. What is the current sort of formation of these guys, and what kind of impact are they having in politics right now?
So Musk has brought a lot of these people with him effectively. I mean, Sachs, who had become by that point a Republican donor, has a profile in his own right, but like he now has a high profile job as the AI and crypto czar. You've seen a bunch of other close contacts of Elon Musk, like sort of like longtime associates, get into the Trump administration. This guy, Steve Davis, who's kind of he's not a political figure at all. He's like Musk's fixer, has been with him since SpaceX. He is the guy running the Boring Company. He was the guy who helped Musk in his, takeover of Twitter. So you've seen some of those kind of like longtime loyalist types get jobs at Doge. But then also, because Musk didn't really have a big political network going in, he's more or less just grafted onto Thiel's. Sachs is certainly in the Thiel network, but you also have Jim O'Neill, who's like an undersecretary at the HHS. That was Thiel's nominee to lead the FDA. Thiel's former chief of staff, Michael Kratsios, is back in is the president's chief science advisor. And like, none of these jobs are that big, but like, it's more just like the accumulation. Like you're just seeing like a bunch of PayPal, Thielverse world people find their way to the White House. And I mean, obviously like the most important one, and I can't believe I haven't mentioned this until now, is like J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance worked for Peter Thiel. Thiel was his main political patron. Like J.D. Vance, no chance, in my mind, he wins his Senate primary. No chance he's a U.S. senator without the money that Thiel gave him to seed that candidacy. And when he ran in 2022, when you look at the timing like of Elon Musk's endorsement and the money that he spent on the 2024 election, like it matches up very, very, very closely with the selection of J.D. Vance as vice president. And I don't know if Musk asked for that or saw that, but I think in one way or another, those things are connected. Picking Vance is part of what gave many of these tech guys the confidence to get behind J.D. Vance. And I think one of the arguments for picking Vance, and there's been some reporting on this, like Don Jr. was supportive of J.D. Vance. So like Don Jr. obviously is not part of the Peter Thiel network, but Musk was supportive of J.D. Vance. And so you had people in Silicon Valley, major donors, pushing it. Being vice president, it seems like, is never fun, particularly like when Elon Musk is around. Like, there are all these jokes about like, oh, Elon's a real vice president or whatever. But that's kind of just like standard fare for VP, I think. It's kind of not a great job. But I will say, like, Trump is only going to be president for one term, and J.D. Vance, like in all likelihood, will move into 2028 as the Republican frontrunner. And if he's able to like maintain that alliance with Elon Musk, that's going to be very valuable to him. People keep saying like, oh man, J.D. Vance, he must be so mad at Elon Musk. He's taking all his thunder. And it's like, no way. Like Elon Musk is J.D. Vance's best friend right now. Like J.D. Vance is going to accept the subservient position in which he's in, or whatever, the position where he shows up every now and then to like humiliate a world leader, and otherwise, gets out of Musk's way or something. And because really like J.D. Vance and Musk, like that alliance, if it holds strong, is going to be good for both of them.
Yeah. And is there any reporting on what like Musk and Thiel's relationship is right now?
My understanding of it, based on my own reporting, it's not a close relationship. And I don't know if it was ever a close relationship. I think they're speaking with some regularity, but they are not like besties in any way. Although it does feel like there's been a little bit of a cooling. Like Musk has, often like the best way to figure out what's going on in Musk's head is just like looking at his Twitter feed. And like he has like tweeted Thiel speeches, over the last couple of years. Like he's been like more positive about Thiel than I think he's ever been. I don't think Thiel has like a great relationship with Donald Trump. This is like a whole other story, but like Thiel did not donate in 2024 to Trump. So at least he didn't donate via like a conventional contribution. There are reports of some dark money contributions. Although Thiel doesn't have a direct relationship with Trump, many of the people in Thiel's orbit are talking to Trump all the time.
Max, I think that this has been like a really great insight for us into understanding this earlier part of Elon Musk's legacy before he gets to the companies that we know him for much more, the Teslas and the SpaceXs, and how that kind of feeds through to this larger story of who he becomes. So thanks so much for taking the time to kick off our series with us and to come on the show. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was great, Max. Thanks again. Cheers.
Thank you both. Really enjoyed it.
System Crash is hosted by Paris Marks and Brian Merchant. Production is by Eric Wickham. Our theme music is Dystopia by your good friends in Yacht. Support the show on patreon.com/systemcrashpod to get a monthly bonus episode, and tune in next week for our next entry in the Elon in Power series.
Bye.